Do you believe in free will?
Yes, I do.
What evidence do you have for it?
I observe it directly, inside myself. I make choices.
But that isn't scientific evidence. Science requires reproducible results. Scientific facts can be seen the same way by everyone in the third person, without bringing in first-person experiences.
I agree, it isn't scientific. As convinced as I am that I have free will, I shall always be slightly less confident that you do. It's not just free will that is like this. The conscious soul, of which free will is just one feature, is in the same situation. I know I have one. I am reasonably confident that you have one too. But I cannot be sure. Do you think you have a soul?
If by this you mean a poetic term for the chemical processes of the brain, then yes.
No, I mean something supernatural. Not just computation. It is a feeling of being alive, the act of experiencing things. This is something that you could not, even in principle, program a computer to do.
No, I don't believe I have anything like that. There is no evidence of such a thing.
Then perhaps you do not have a soul and I do.
That is offensive.
It should be. I was not trying to offend you for the sake of offending you, my friend. I just wanted to provoke a reaction. If you were only a physical object with no soul, then why should you take offense at all? Does a machine have a sense of dignity?
Perhaps evolution has led me to react whenever I am insulted. An attack on the credibility of an early hominid may have weakened his position in his tribe in terms of food or mating or something like that.
But I did not attack you. On the contrary, I conceded that if you say this whole thing I am claiming about a soul I can observe in myself is nonsense to you, then perhaps you are correct. Whatever it is that rebels against that idea, I would encourage you to listen to it.
Well, I do think that my experience is similar to yours. I do see inside of me that thing you call the soul. But I contend that it is an illusion.
An illusion to whom? If the soul is not real, then what is it that gets deceived?
The brain.
How would a brain that has no soul ever get the idea of the soul in the first place? Is consciousness a physical law like magnetism or gravity?
No, it is some kind of illusion that emerges from complexity.
How does that work?
Nobody knows. That is why they call it the hard problem of consciousness. How do you say it works?
Nobody knows. I am confident, however, that there is no principle either theoretical or practical by which a computer obtains a conscious soul. Not even with technology millions of years in the future. Therefore, I am not a computer. I am something else, something non-physical, attached to a brain. A brain which in other respects does resemble a computer.
Well, can we get back to free will?
Sure.
Okay, so you don't have scientific evidence that proves free will exists. But I have evidence that it does not. Have you heard of the Liebe experiment?
Sure. People were asked to move at a random moment, and then observe the time on the clock when they made the decision to move, right?
Yes, that's it. The researchers found that electrical activity in the brain increased about a half-second before the subjects consciously noted the decision to move. If choices happen before we notice them, then we are really making a conscious choice. Several similar studies have followed along these lines, and many of them found similar problems with the idea of free will.
I suppose these studies were done carefully, and I do not debate their potential practical applications. But the results do not mean what you are suggesting they mean. Human brains are not perfect at tasks such as generating random actions. If you have ever played rock, paper, scissors, you probably understand this already. There are certain actions which can appear voluntary, which we may even acknowledge to be voluntary in the ordinary sense of the word, but which are essentially being delegated by the will to some kind of computational subroutine in the brain. Choosing a random time to act or a random thing to do is one of those things.
I can sort of understand that. But it seems like you are just picking out the kinds of things that happen to be used in experiments. It's a little too convenient.
No, I would say that this class of semi-voluntary actions is larger than that. Have you ever typed in a password without really thinking through what you were typing? I've had the sensation sometimes that the fingers knew something my conscious brain didn't.
Yes, I've experienced that.
And in sports there are other analogies. For example, suppose I decide to move in a particular path down the basketball court. Down the left side instead of the right. I might say I chose to do that. In the sense that nobody forced me to do it. It wasn't a physical chain reaction in the ordinary sense. However, I would not be surprised if a researcher observed electrical activity in my brain, or even my body starting to move left, before I consciously realized that that's what my brain decided to do. That doesn't mean free will doesn't exist. It just means that the decision to move left was not a direct result of free will.
Then what was it?
It was the result of something much like a computer program. A program that plays basketball. The will decided to play basketball. But once it did, it delegated to the brain's basketball program the task of making the right moves. Just like I delegate to a program in the brain the task of logging into a computer using the fingers, without consciously bringing to mind the password. Ordinary experience is full of these situations, and qualitatively these kinds of choices are very different from choices of the will.
So you are not troubled by these experiments?
No. These experiments don't really tell us anything philosophically new. They just pile up practical data about many kinds of situations of which we could have thought up examples ourselves.
Okay, but there are other types of challenges to free will. Things like magnetic manipulation of the brain, or subliminal advertising, for example. They can be shown to affect things that you would call choices, that take place on time scales giving ample room for reflection. Even moral and political judgments can be manipulated using physical inputs.
Some of these techniques are very novel, of course. But the truths they demonstrate have been known to man since ancient times. Alcohol, or lack of sleep, or PMS can affect a person's judgment or even their personality significantly enough. Magnetic techniques are just a more precise way of doing it. I assume the technology will improve significantly over time, and people will be impressed. But all that any of this means is that our wills are not immune to physical inputs.
So why do you think the will is not itself physical?
Because engineering could never create one. Not a real will, not a real soul, in the sense that we experience it to be. I realize that this is not a precise scientific definition.
If it isn't scientific, why should I believe it?
I think you are looking in the wrong place. Looking for the soul in a laboratory is like looking for God in space. You may recall the remark of the Soviet cosmonauts saying they didn't see God up there. The believer is not surprised by such things. God is not a physical being located in space, just like the soul is not a physical object located in the brain. Science will not find either one any more than Hamlet can find Shakespeare by searching all of Denmark.
Okay, but if you can admit that physical inputs affect the behavior of the will, then in what sense is it free?
In the same sense that I say I am a free man living in a free country. I have all sorts of choices I could make. Yet it is also true that the state can limit my choices, with laws and regulations, and these will have a noticeable impact on my behavior. It can even distort my perception through propaganda. Nonetheless, within the constraints placed on me, by the state or by my upbringing or by economic or physical limitations, or my brain itself, I still have choices to make. Free will doesn't mean complete freedom, of the sort that only God has. It just means having any freedom at all. Being able to make any kind of genuine choice, something no computer has ever done, is nothing short of a miracle.